His hand is inside the wolf's mouth. He isn't pulling away. That's the first thing wrong with this picture. Not the teeth, not the size of the animal, but the stillness of the man. The hand should be moving. It isn't. The wolf should be tearing. It isn't. They're both holding a position that costs them something to hold. The wolf is enormous, big enough that the air around him feels thinner, the ground less solid, and he is calm. Calm the way a held breath is calm, a stillness that's been chosen. Something is keeping those jaws open, a pledge, a promise that someone in this room already knew would be broken before the day was out. The hand belongs to a god. The wolf knows whose hand it is. He knows it by warmth, by smell, by years of being the only one who came close. That's the worst part of this image. The wolf knows. And the hand is still there. Behind them, gods are watching from a distance no one is willing to cross. The room is silent in a way rooms become silent when something terrible has been agreed to in advance. To understand why the hand is there, we have to go back to the beginning of the wolf. He was small when they brought him to Asgard, small enough to hold without fear. Fenrir was the son of Loki, whose other children were a goddess of the dead and a serpent large enough to encircle the world. But the cub himself was just a cub. Dark eyes, a muzzle that hadn't grown into its face yet. He ate from a bowl on the ground, and he ate hungrily, the way young things do when they haven't learned to be cautious. The gods watched from across the courtyard, not out of wisdom, but out of a wordless instinct. The same feeling you get standing at the edge of something you can't name. They stayed back, all of them, except Tyr. Tyr was the god who kept the oaths. He held the agreements that made the world legible, the treaties, the truces, the promises that let gods and men know where they stood. He wasn't reckless. He was the least reckless of all of them. And yet, he was the one who crossed the distance no other god would cross, crouched beside the wolf, and fed him from his hand. The cub lifted his nose. Among every smell in Asgard, the smoke and the cold stone and the fur and iron of gods who kept their distance, there was one smell that meant something different, warm, specific. The hand that always came. Fenrir didn't have a word for trust, but he had this, the smell that meant the hunger would end, the warmth that appeared without fail, the recognition that out of all things in the world, this one came toward him. He pressed his muzzle into the open palm. He had no reason to think it would ever be otherwise. The cub grew, not quickly, the way a tide rises. You don't see it moving, and then suddenly the shoreline is somewhere else entirely. Every morning, Tyr came. Same bowl, same hand, same unhurried crossing of the distance between them. And the wolf, who knew that hand by smell before he could see it clearly, would raise his head and wait. The other gods stopped coming close. They found reasons to be elsewhere, to observe from the far side of a hall, to have very pressing business at the edge of the courtyard. By the time Fenrir was half grown, the ring of gods watching him had pulled back to a distance that couldn't be called anything but fear. When Fenrir reached his full size, he was wrong in the way something impossible is wrong. He wasn't evil, or even threatening in any deliberate sense. He was just fundamentally too large for the world he was standing in. His shoulders were at the height of the walls. When he lay down, he filled the courtyard the way a river fills a valley. Tyr still came. Same time, same hand. But behind closed doors, the gods were gathering. They had received a prophecy, and the prophecy named Odin, the All-Father, the one who held the whole of Asgard in the weight of his will, as the god who would die at this wolf's jaws at the end of all things. Fenrir hadn't done anything. He had grown. That was his crime. A prophecy had decided what his size would someday mean. In a closed room, the gods reached their decision. They called it necessity. No one in the room argued with the word. The first chain was called Leyding. The gods brought it to him themselves and made a game of it. Would he let them try? They came toward him with iron in their hands, the gods who had spent years finding reasons not to come close. And Tyr was among them. The wolf saw him. That was enough. If Tyr was there, this was a thing his family was doing, and his family was honest with him. He let them fasten the chain. He flexed once, and Leyding was gone. Not bent, gone. The gods laughed. They called it impressive. The laugh was the lie underway. Too loud, too quick. The kind of laugh that sounds like relief instead of joy. But the wolf didn't know what relief sounded like in this room. He thought he had won a game. The second chain was Dromi, heavier, forged with more care, the kind of weight that would have stopped anything else. They came again, Tyr again, the same hand at the edge of the group. Fenrir let them put it on him because they had asked him to. He shook once, and Dromi broke apart against the ground. The gods laughed again. Some of them looked at Tyr. Tyr's face was doing something that wasn't a laugh. 2 chains, 2 failures. Fenrir still unbound, still walking the halls, still waiting for Tyr's hand each morning as if nothing between them had changed. From where he stood, nothing had. The gods understood now that iron wouldn't hold him, so they went somewhere iron wasn't the point. Nidavellir was deeper than mining. The kind of underground where the stone listened, where the forges worked in a cold that came up through the floor instead of fire that came down from above. The dwarves who lived there built things that shouldn't exist, and they took commissions from gods who'd run out of other options. The gods told them what they needed, a chain that could hold a wolf. 2 iron chains had failed to hold. The dwarves listened and named their materials. 6 things, none of which exist. The sound of a cat's footstep, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, the spittle of a bird. You've never encountered any of these things because they don't exist, which is precisely why what the dwarves wove from them couldn't be broken. You can't tear apart something that was never there to begin with. What came back from Nidavellir looked like nothing. A ribbon, soft as cloth, thin as a thought, light enough to rest on an open palm without the palm noticing. The gods passed it between them in silence. This was the thing that would hold the wolf their iron couldn't. They brought it to Fenrir. He looked at it, and he understood immediately that something was wrong. A chain this small should have been an insult beneath the effort of shaking loose. He'd snapped Leyding without trying. He'd shed Dromi like dead skin. This ribbon should have meant nothing. The fact that it didn't feel like nothing was the thing that told him everything. So he named a price. One of the gods would place a hand inside his mouth, held there as pledge, while they bound him. If the chain proved to be what it appeared, he'd lose nothing. If it was something else, if the gods had deceived him, the hand stayed. He wasn't asking for protection. He was offering them a way to refuse, naming a cost steep enough that perhaps they'd step back, confess the lie, and let the whole arrangement collapse before it began. They didn't refuse. Tyr stepped forward. The moment itself was quiet. Tyr's hand rested inside the wolf's open mouth, not trembling, not pulled back, exactly as it had always been in those years of feeding, of crossing the distance no other god would cross. The teeth were visible. The tongue was warm. Gleipnir lay around the wolf's legs like something spilled, thin as ribbon, soft as the memory of a sound. The chain held. Fenrir pulled against it the way he'd pulled against iron, with everything, with the full weight of what he was, and it didn't give. The ribbon didn't snap. It didn't fray. It held the way a fact holds. And in the holding, something shifted in the wolf. He understood. That's the moment. Not the binding, not the ribbon settling around his legs like it weighed nothing. The moment is what happened inside the wolf when the pulling stopped. When he knew he'd been tricked. The pledge was a lie. The gods had put a hand in his mouth not because they trusted him, but because they needed him to trust them long enough to be bound. And that hand, the one he'd known since he was small enough to fit beneath it, that hand was the pledge. The pledge had been broken by the gods. A pledge breaker pays. Tyr taught him that. Not with words. They never used words between them. Tyr taught him with presence, with the daily crossing of a distance no other god would cross, with the steady hand extended toward jaws that could have closed at any moment and didn't. Because a deal was a deal, and you honored what you agreed to. Fenrir didn't bite out of rage. Rage would have been simpler. He bit because Tyr had spent years teaching him what keeping a deal meant. And now the deal required it. From Tyr's side of the jaw, there was a pressure, and then there wasn't a hand anymore. He didn't flinch. He didn't scream. He stood with what remained. The wolf was bound on an island called Lyngvi, in a lake called Amsvartnir. Gleipnir still held. That ribbon, that nothing, that soft, impossible thread was still holding against the full weight of a wolf who had struggled until there was nothing left to struggle with. Driven between his open jaws, fixed there so the mouth couldn't close, was a sword. It would stay there until the world ended. The howling carried. Across the water, across the dark, out past the edges of the world the gods had built and were now quietly afraid of losing. Tyr walked away with one hand. The other one, the hand Fenrir knew by smell, the specific warmth the wolf had learned to recognize before any word passed between them, gone. Left behind in the dark, on an island in a black lake, in the closed jaws of a wolf who had learned everything he knew about pledges from the god, now walking away without looking back. He didn't look back. That detail matters. It isn't the stoicism of a man who's made peace with what he did. It's the walk of a man who knows there's nothing to see that will make the accounting better. The wolf was a better student than the gods were teachers. On Lyngvi, his breath rose in the cold air and disappeared. The howling carried across the black water and found nothing on the other side. Gleipnir didn't break. The wolf didn't stop. The world continued. For now.